Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's live stream, Apparel with Purpose, Fueling Philanthropy Through Fashion. Really excited to provide you a few updates on the work that we have been doing at Cherry Willow, and very excited about the conversation with this evening's guest. Dan Drucker does incredible work over at Philanthropy Fuel, works with nonprofits to help bring his years of experience in the business world and help nonprofits further their mission, and so really excited to have some discussion about the changing state of philanthropy today, how nonprofits can really foster and continue to build on the great relationships they have to further the impact. And so really excited for today's discussion. And I'd love to go ahead and just introduce today's guest, Dan. Um, Dan, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. I've been pretty pumped about this for the last week, just waiting for tonight.
Yeah, really excited to dive in. So please, if you're watching, let us know what industry you're in, where you guys are joining us from. It's always great to get an idea of, who's out there in the audience, and, if there's anything specifically that we want to address or any questions that you have, drop them in the chat and we'll make sure that we do our best to address those during the stream. And Dan, I know you're no stranger to these live streams, and you've been in the philanthropy space for quite some time now. I'd love for you to give the audience a little bit of background on how you started Philanthropy Fuel, and then how you engage with nonprofits that you support.
Yeah, great. So I actually haven't been in the nonprofit space for all that long, other than things like volunteering. I was in the corporate B2B, sales and marketing space for 35 years. Retired at the beginning of 2024. A couple months later, I decided to start something focused on the nonprofit sector. And at that point, I just kind of dove in, started talking to people, started reading where I could, jumping on podcasts, learning wherever I could. But mostly through the conversations, I learned what was really going on in the sector. And truthfully, when I entered the sector, I thought what I would be doing would be teaching kind of workshops based on the business development skills that I knew worked in B2B and could be transferred over to mostly fundraising and development in the nonprofit sector. And that's true. But as I had all these conversations over a few months, starting in March of 2024, I quickly found, a bigger issue in that the nonprofit world in fundraising and development was facing a lot of stress, a lot of burnout, a lot of pressure, a lot of push to do fundraising, maybe not the right way, from pressure from above, pressure from the outside. And I started to really think about how I could help. So I launched Philanthropy Fuel back in August of 2024. And if you think about the name, it's there for a reason. I felt like the sector needed a push, needed a spark, needed energy. So thus, needed fueling, thus the name Philanthropy Fuel. And even my logo, Matt, took a lot of thought. And it's a tree with deep roots, with kind of an orange energy, helping it grow. And it really talks about the sector needing that kind of energy to push through everything that's going on. But it also talked about growth being something that's long-term, deep roots, plant a foundation, but don't expect to see results tomorrow or the next day or even the next month, maybe not even the next year. And that's both in terms of the problem you're trying to solve, your mission, but also in terms of how you build relationships. So that's when I launched Philanthropy Fuel. And again, started out thinking it would be more about business development. What it's kind of morphed into is helping nonprofits think a little bit out of the box in terms of how they can go about securing corporate partnerships and other types of collaborations. That really took off towards the end of 2024 and into 2025. And I'm working with a few clients to do just that, where we get really specific about the types of organizations that are predisposed to support their type of mission, and find the right people and hit them with some emotional messaging so that we can just get the dialogue started. So I consider my role kind of twofold. One is to help my clients do what I just described. But the second thing is to really just be kind of an advocate for this sector and help lift up the people. And I do that through content and through conversations. And it's been wonderful. It's been rewarding, but it's also been an eye opener.
Yeah, and I love, you said so many great things there, but just the mindfulness that went into the logo. Obviously, Cherry Willow, also a tree, and symbolic of nature that we as people often separate ourselves from. And the symbolism behind the cherry willow logo was the leaves are not always in bloom, and people were not always blooming, but we need to invest in each other. And much like trees, they're all connected, and they can send each other nutrients and support each other. And as people, we can operate in the same way. And together, we can really build that community and go further. And especially what you said about advocating for the sector. I just feel like there's so much more that a lot of people can do. And that's why, one of our phrases is small acts, big impact. Having those daily actions, taking the time specifically around someone that's homeless to just introduce yourself, ask their name. There's so many small gestures that we can do without disrupting our day-to-day lives that we don't know the ripple effect of how those decisions and how those actions are going to affect people, now, but also moving forward. Especially people that are experiencing homelessness, you don't know the last time someone maybe just stopped and had a conversation and took the time. And so that's why, I created Cherry Willow to be a brand to stand for unconditional love. And then to your point earlier, Dan, about having unique propositions for nonprofits to make a difference. That's why we use Apparel to not only, help with fundraising, but also with marketing and just getting the message for these nonprofits, out into the community, and having that wearable advocacy component, creating those conversations, those opportunities for in-person connection, where someone sees like, oh, giving hope to the homeless. What is that? What is Cherry Willow? Oh, how can I get involved? And so there's so many ways. So I love all of the work that you're doing over there at Philanthropy.
I appreciate it. And it's kind of what drew me to you guys in the first place, if you think about it. Besides the tree logo, it's really, I was laughing when I was thinking about this tonight. And if you took all my content, whether from LinkedIn, from my newsletter, whatever, from the last 6 months and dumped it into AI and asked for it to come up with, 6, 7, 8 key themes, every single one of them applies to Cherry Willow, which is why I was so attracted to you guys in the first place. In the initial meeting with Shauna, your amazing director of impact. And then when we, got on with you, Matt, and to hear what you were working on, I was like, this hits on everything. It hits on systemic change versus just a Band-Aid approach, something I've spoken about a lot. It talks about being innovative in what you're doing and not just doing the same old fundraising to individuals. You've got corporate partnerships. You've got nonprofit collaborations. You've got technology involved, which if you want to talk about later, I'll certainly leave that for you. You've got a technology component involved. You've got just so many different ways. You got an earned revenue model. You've got advocacy. So everything that you were about is things that I had talked about and advocate for and try to get my nonprofit clients and the nonprofit sector in general to embrace, to be more innovative and to just be kind of unapologetically bold, because it's really, really noisy out there. There's a lot of chaos. There's a ton of messaging. And if you don't do things a little bit out of the ordinary and make it easy for your supporters to both find you and go with you on the journey, then it's going to be really, really difficult going forward. So that's what really drew me to Cherry Willow in the first place, which is why I knew that I wanted to somehow, be a part of it. And that's why obviously we've partnered up to see if I can help you guys get some partnerships and some collaborations going beyond what you've been able to do on your own. And it's been really exciting.
Yeah, and that's exactly, some of the mission for why I started Cherry Willow was I had just come from a couple of different startups, and I really loved working in that atmosphere, being very nimble, listening to clients and tailoring your solutions to what their needs are. And so I wanted to bring, some of that startup mindset, but approach it to the nonprofit sector and have that additional impact and cause behind it. And Dan, you mentioned the technology. We're working on something really exciting to help people experiencing homelessness get connected with a lot of the resources that are already available. There's so many wonderful nonprofits that are doing great work, but it can be really challenging to get in touch with them if you don't know about them. And so that's where, it ties back into the apparel. The more awareness we can generate for organizations that are already doing great work, the more people that come into that Cherry Willow community and the Cherry Willow network, the more likely we're going to have a further impact. So it's all about alignment between nonprofits, and together as a community, we can go further and make sure that no one is slipping through the cracks or no one is not taking advantage of services, that are already available just because they're not aware of them. Especially when we're talking about, the staff in the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of animosity. There's some turmoil right now with funding. People are already being stretched really thin. So our goal with any organization that we partner with is to take burden off of them, to help more people be aware of them and potentially add a revenue stream for donations through the apparel, and really just emphasize, the great work that they're doing in the communities. And then on the technology side, we have some really cool initiatives where donors are going to be able to see the actual impact that their support has on the people. And storytelling is a really important component, I feel like, for all nonprofits. And so getting out there, capturing stories of people that are experiencing homelessness, and trying to highlight the solutions that exist, that's all really important to me in the work that we're doing at Cherry Willow. And so just the nonprofit collaborations and the sponsorships. And, I'm training for, my Pedal for Progress ride from Sacramento to San Diego in July. So all of that is just building up to hopefully getting more people aware of some of the solutions that exist to homelessness, advocating for the people, and advocating for, policies to create more affordable housing, and easier access to things like mental health, addiction recovery, and then financial education. All of the tools that we're developing are about empowerment, meeting people where they're at, giving them the tools so that they can see a realistic runway of how they elevate themselves out of homelessness while enabling them to just focus on that next right step, whatever it might be for them. So that's a little bit about the technology initiative, and there will be more to come in the coming months as we get further along with the development process. But yeah, really excited to be where we're at right now. And any organizations that are out there and would like to learn more, I'd love to connect with you if you are interested in a potential collaboration, or even if you just wanted to learn a little bit more about the initiatives we're working on and how you can support us. And so, Dan, I'd love to just get your perspective on, some of the different coaching, some of the things that are most important that you've seen, transitioning from the business world into the nonprofit space in the last year and a half. Are there any common, pitfalls that some of these nonprofits are taking, or how do you kind of go in and provide guidance to people, leveraging all of that business experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate it. So there's really two different sides of it. So the first one is that, to me, from what I've seen, the face of philanthropy is changing. It's shifting, right? So if you look at donors today, they don't want to just, I was going to say cut a check. I don't think anybody cuts a check anymore, but they don't want to just be a financial supporter. People today want to be immersed in something bigger than them. They want to be part of community. They want to be part of a solution, and they want to get involved more than just financially. And this is no doubt driven a lot by younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, but I think it's kind of now made its way throughout the entire donor base. And yes, you still have your high wealth individuals that are kind of a little bit more traditional, but those are getting to be fewer and more far between. And if nonprofits don't figure out how to reach these other audiences, the gap, what I call the kind of the nonprofit gap, or, it coincides with the wealth gap, but the nonprofit gap is just going to be getting bigger and bigger. And so nonprofits had to figure out, how do you build communities? How do you get everybody immersed? How do you get them involved beyond financial? And how do you make it easy for them to do that? So we might be talking about advocacy. We might be talking about peer-to-peer fundraising. We might be talking about volunteerism. And even volunteerism has so many different shapes to it. There's the traditional volunteering, like I do at a dog shelter every week, right? I'm there for a few hours, a couple of different days, taking care of dogs, doing everything, helping get them adopted. And that's awesome. But not everybody can do that. There's online volunteering that people can do. There's other kind of support they can lend. There's skills-based volunteering. What I talk to my clients about when we're talking about corporations, every corporation has a finance department, right? So those people could volunteer either to help the nonprofits with their financial stuff. You can see I'm very well versed in the financial end of it. Or they could potentially, depending on the communities that are served, especially if it's an underserved community, could they offer financial education, financial literacy type of help for those communities. There's a lot of ways to be creative. And I think that nonprofits have to stop thinking, oh, we're not businesses. We're not like corporations. We just do this and we get donors and we thank them and we send them their tax, memo. And then, a few months later, we ask for a second donation. That's just not going to fly anymore with a lot of the population. And I think whether that's, corporate partnerships or individuals, foundations, it doesn't really matter, because you're still talking about humans on the other end, and they want to be involved in something bigger than just a financial support type of situation. So I really think the face of philanthropy is changing. I think nonprofits have to diversify their funding streams. A lot of them got hit over the head pretty strongly this year, especially in the U.S. with obviously the decreasing federal grants and the pulling away of certain big, agencies. And even those that were not relying on federal grants, somebody said it to me, he was an executive director, and he was 100% right. He's like, I don't get federal grants, but all those people that do, they're now swimming in my pond, right? They're now competing for the same donations, the same funding. So I think it's really, the sector's kind of at a tipping point, I'll be honest, Matt. I think there's so many nonprofits out there, the ones that embrace collaboration, partnerships, getting people immersed, building communities. I think they're going to really succeed. And I think they're going to be the ones that push social change forward over the next decade. But I think there's going to be a lot of them that if they stay the way they are in traditional fundraising and don't try different approaches, they may have the greatest missions. I mean, I talk to people every day, founders, executive directors, CEOs, great missions, wonderful passion, hearts of gold. They founded they joined their organizations for the right reasons. But the problem is nobody's going to know about them. Nobody's going to know about their mission, because there's just too much noise out there to do things the same old way.
Yeah, I love what you said about community building. I think that is what's now more important than ever, is really leveraging each other and helping each other, not competing against each other, which I think a lot of nonprofits fall into that. Exactly what you were saying with the restriction in federal funds. Now there's this increased competition for really the same or a similar pool of donors. And that's one of the ways why we wanted to utilize Apparel, is to be able to engage with a younger audience. Millennials and Gen Z, they're typically more socially minded. And so by being able to work with them from an apparel standpoint, that's how they show up in the world. That's part of their identity. And so if they can support a cause-based brand that, is, in Cherry Willow's instance, helping people experiencing homelessness by empowering them with financial education, giving them access to other resources, and then through some of the collaborations with us, they can wear whatever cause that they might be passionate about, find a way to support that, and, support it from a monetary standpoint, but also by wearing that message in the community. Again, they're building more awareness out there. They're showing up with what's important to them in a way that's really unique. And if you can do that with a cool design and you can generate conversations, now you're just adding to the potential community. You're connecting with new potential donors. You're connecting with maybe local sponsors for events, or, even corporate business sponsors and partnerships. With Apparel, when you're out there representing a cause that you're passionate about, that's really contagious. And so people, to your point, Dan, they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think the opportunity now with, this current administration and some of their funding issues with the policies, I think there's more of an appetite for people. They realize, like, we have to do more to make a difference. We can't rely necessarily on things that are beyond our control. So, like, what are the efforts that we can take daily? And how do we show up and make a difference? And so that's, I think, what Cherry Willow is all about, and advocating for more people to get involved.
Oh, I agree. I see my buddy Tyrone just commented, stop competing and find a way to collaborate. And he's 100% correct. And I've seen it when I've talked to nonprofits, even about corporate partnerships, but about, collaborations with other nonprofits. There's this fear that they're going to lose control, that they're going to be at a deficit. And I think in general, nonprofits feel a little bit like at a deficit. Fundraisers feel they're asking for something. They're somebody's going to see them as just being overly aggressive or overly pushy, when in fact, if it's done right, they should be helping someone realize their goals, which is, again, to be involved in something that's near and dear to their own heart. You mentioned apparel as advocacy, and Matt, I'll be honest with you, when I first heard about that from you and Shauna, I was intrigued and really pumped about it because, I've probably told you this story. I'm married to someone who was in the garment industry for 35 years, and now she's a professor of fashion merchandising. So, number one, I don't dress myself anymore. Anything important, I have to get her go ahead. I used to dress myself, but if you've got an expert in the house, why not outsource it? So, but I've also listened to her, especially as she's been teaching and some of the lessons and the conversations with students. And when you talk about clothing, it's very visual, it's very emotional, it's very personal. And I think that's really important, like you said, to millennials, Gen Zs, and other generations today. But I love the fact that it's mobile. So when I started talking to you guys at the beginning, I kind of pictured, people wearing the apparel, and maybe it's the Cherry Willow apparel off the website, or maybe it's a co-branded limited edition with a corporation, or a co-branded limited edition with a nonprofit. And whether you're an employee of one of those organizations or you purchased it, I picture like people walking around, in parks, in malls, in bars, restaurants, out on the street, at their jobs, in their schools, whatever it is, sitting on their stoop, and other people seeing it and asking questions. What is that? What is that collaboration? What is that initiative? What does that slogan mean about the unhoused and building communities and things like that? And I see then people getting excited about it. And what you've done, which I think not enough nonprofits and social enterprises, and quite frankly, corporations do, is you have made it very easy for people who want to support you to become advocates just by walking around and telling people what it is they're wearing and why they're so committed to it. And I think that's an important thing that nonprofits have to figure out to do. They've all got supporters, and they've all got, really feverish supporters, some kind of group of those people. But you can't just hope for advocacy, and you can't just ask for it. You have to kind of guide them and give them the tools to be able to advocate for you. And I think nonprofits really can take a lesson from you guys on how to do that, because it's really important to, if you want to spur a movement and spur inspiration and get people moving forward and make that support kind of grow exponentially, you've got to get that message out there more than just through your own, marketing department and comms department. It's got to get out there with your supporters, the communities you serve. People have to be talking about it. And then the thing kind of just takes on a life of its own and grows on its own. And I know that's kind of what you're going for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea kind of came about from seeing some of the kindness creators that are popular on, YouTube or Reels, TikTok, wherever you're spending too much time on your phone watching videos. And so these creators, they would go do an act of kindness, and there was a huge appetite for that. They would get millions of impressions, so much engagement. So I knew that there was this appetite for people wanting to do good. And to your point, Dan, what I wanted to do was make it as easy as possible for people to do good. So a lot of the stuff is about lowering barriers. And so just by, showing up, wearing apparel, being an advocate, educating yourself about the realities of homelessness, that was another facet with apparel. 40 to 60% of people that are experiencing homelessness have jobs, so they could be working at Target or Walmart or McDonald's, or, and you wouldn't know that they're experiencing homelessness. And so if you're wearing Cherry Willow with an advocacy statement for people that are homeless, that creates an opportunity for in-person connection, which I feel like in this digital age, we're able to connect over this live stream and, connect with people. I think I saw one of the members was tuning in from Uganda, and that's amazing. But a lot of times this technology also enables us to disconnect from the person right next to us. And so that's what I wanted to really foster, was a community of people that were educated about the realities of homelessness, that were advocates for the people experiencing homelessness, and really just get more awareness and make it easy for people to engage.
I think you have some questions there.
Yeah, it looks like questions coming in from Allison. So when starting from scratch, what's the first step to build an apparel-driven advocacy program? So really, I would say if you're starting from scratch, you'd want to know what are you advocating for, and then think of a phrase or symbol that makes it easy to identify with. So like, when you're thinking about apparel, you only have a few seconds to kind of capture that attention. So one of our designs is the humanized, not otherize, where we're seeking unconditional love. So just having 5 words, something that's easy to digest very quickly, that can make a big difference. And then how do we ensure that the collaborations with corporations don't become just performative philanthropy? That's a great question, and that's maybe a little bit more challenging to answer. I would say the best way is to engage with corporations that are deeply aligned with your mission. And Dan, I'd love to get your perspective on that as well. On just, there are unfortunately corporations that are doing things, just for tax purposes or maybe just for image. So I think kind of just diving deep, doing the due diligence before you're engaging with these organizations, just to make sure that they are truly aligned with the mission, is the best way that you can avoid stepping into that pitfall. But Dan, I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do have a lot to say on it, and not surprisingly. So there's a couple of things there, Allison. One is that, when I talk to my clients when we're looking at corporate partnerships, there is a lot of introspection that has to happen first. What's worked in the past? What are you trying to accomplish? What types of partnerships are you looking for? What do you hope to get out of it? I'm a firm believer that both missions of the corporation and the nonprofit should advance at the same rate. They have different missions, but they need to advance at the same rate. The biggest thing is to find corporate partners that are predisposed to supporting causes like yours. The other thing to know is the landscape of corporate partnerships is evolving, and what corporations, not all of them, as Matt said, some of them just want the tax benefits, some of them just wants the PR, but a lot of them truly want to inspire their stakeholders, and there's no bigger stakeholder than their employees. Okay, so you as a nonprofit, when you're looking for the right fit, you're looking for those corporations that want to inspire their employees, because they're fighting for talent. They're fighting to attract and retain talent. And especially when, again, I keep mentioning this, but when you talk about millennials and Gen Z, they only want to work for companies that are truly committed to doing social good, not superficial, but really down deep. And they also only want to buy from companies that do the same. So to engage those employees, they're looking for partnerships where, again, some of the things I talked about before, not just financial, not just a corporate match on donations, double the donation, things like that, but getting employees involved in advocacy, in fundraising, in volunteerism, whether it's skill-based or in person or online. So that becomes very important, but so do their other stakeholders. They want to make sure that they're showing their other stakeholders that there's a value match. So whether that's their board, their stockholders, their partners, their customers, their prospects, the communities that they exist in terms of their headquarters and major locations, they want to make sure that those folks understand where their values lie, and they like to get those folks inspired by what they're doing. So I think it becomes really important. And then the last thing I'll say on that for now is you've got to be really super specific in not just the companies you're looking and the businesses you're looking to partner with, but who within that organization is the right person to talk to about your mission and your cause. And that's what we do a lot of at Philanthropy Fuel, is we do some really, really deep research after we've done that deep introspection. And, I'm just going to give you an example. I was helping at the end of last year a Ukraine-based philanthropy that was focused on providing humanitarian aid, especially trauma counseling and relocation services with everything going on. And she was kind of getting desperate for funding and came to me and said, I really need some sponsorships and partnership from U.S. companies. I have no idea how to do that, and I haven't had any success with it. Could you help? I was like, I can try. So again, we did that introspection about what we wanted to accomplish. And then I did some real research, and I wasn't looking for, a list of 100. I was looking for a list of 5-7 companies that had supported the Ukraine people and humanitarian efforts, at some point when the war has been on. And I found a bunch, and most of them were right at the beginning. But I dove deeper into that, and I was able to identify one person, and she's Ukrainian and happens to be the head of global affairs for a major U.S. financial corporation. And it only took one very personal, very customized email, followed up by a LinkedIn DM for her to agree to meet with the founder of this charity, have her present, what she's doing, have some back and forth. And at this point, there's been proposals exchanged, there's waiting for some approvals. I don't know whether it will result in funding, because there's obviously some bureaucracy involved when you get involved in that. But the fact that this person, so high level in a financial organization in the U.S., was able to agree to a meeting with the founder of a very small charity across the world struggling for funding is it evidence that if you take a very super specific approach to your messaging, your outreach, your research, you can resonate with people that are already predisposed to support your cause. And that's what I really advocate with on the corporate end, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where somebody's just kind of, I don't want to say using you, because they're still giving you funding, which is nice, but they're not doing it to be a true partner. And I'll just tell, if it's okay, one more story. It's another nonprofit I talked to, a fairly well-known one, that we're talking about if we should do business together. And I said, I'm surprised you reach out to me, because you seem to have a lot of corporate partners. And they said to me, we do and we don't. We get, because we're known and because it's a cause that everybody cares about, we get a lot of PR agencies for these corporations reaching out to us to do a campaign together. And listen, we're not complaining. We get funding for that, but it's a one and done. It's not a partnership. It's a paying for, the campaign, paying for the PR involved. We really want to find a couple of partners that will stay with us for years and help us truly advocate and advance the cause. So those are that type of things that you need to look for in a corporate partner, so that you can make sure that nobody's at a deficit or nobody's just doing it for the wrong reasons. And as a nonprofit, you don't want to go into those type of partnerships just to get some short-term cash flow. You want to find the right partners so that, again, you're at an equal level all the way through.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the alignment and the depth of research that you provide. And I love that story about, finding someone who the cause resonated with, that was in a position to make a difference. That's one of my deep rooted beliefs, is that most people, want to do good. And there's so many great causes out there, and there's so many problems, it seems, that it can feel overwhelming. Certainly when it comes to something like homelessness, there's a large issue where it feels almost insurmountable if you're trying to tackle it all at once. But by focusing on the next right step, what's one positive action that you can take, and then collectively sharing that, coming together as a community, there's a great way to get involved, and finding those partners who are invested in the mission, who are going to be long-term successful collaborations. And doing that research up front is really important, so that way you avoid stepping into some of those pitfalls. But that was a great question. And then Dan, I was curious with you, when you're kind of looking for partnerships at an early level, before you kind of dive deep into the research, how are you finding these organizations that are connected? Is there anywhere that you're looking to see, where these causes are, where there are some opportunities for nonprofits to collaborate and partner with corporations specifically, in some of the earlier stages? Like, where are you seeing, some of this alignment, and where are you finding that information, like in the early stages? I think that could be really helpful for, anyone in the audience that wants to try to take a little bit more of this tailored approach.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm using a lot of AI, I'll be honest, because it's just an incredible research tool in record time. And so, it depends on what you're looking for. So I've got a client that's more local to me, that are just, wonderful people. And we meet every couple of weeks, and we're talking about what partnerships they've had, what areas of their business, or what types of campaigns we want to align with different types of companies. Again, we're thinking outside the box. So that drives who we're going to reach out to. So this particular one is a foundation for a hospital in a very underfunded community. And, besides the obvious things like sponsorships and things for their gala and just overall, donations, we're kind of getting creative and looking at, like, cosmetics companies that could put together, fancy bags filled with, lotions and soaps and other stuff I have no idea about, and use that to give to women in this underfunded community that are leaving the maternity ward after giving birth. A nice thing to give to them. We're talking about targeting department stores that throw out, clothing and stuff like that. And what could we use to put together a wellness, a wellness back to school event for kids in this community? Who could we partner with to provide financial literacy training to, again, people in this underfunded community? So I think it really depends on what the mission is, but that helps you get very specific about where you look. And then I kind of dive into AI. What I'm looking for in AI really is the sources, believe it or not. So yes, I'll get the list, but the list is nice. What I want, once I've put together, this is what we're looking for, both geography, the mission, the types of companies, what we're looking for, I'll get a list, but what I want is the links to press releases, articles, website mentions, LinkedIn posts, whatever it might be, videos on YouTube, where either an executive is interviewed or these companies are talking about, excuse me, what they're doing. And that's where you start finding the very specific people. So again, you're trying to find organizations that are predisposed, and they've shown in the past that they either support your exact cause or something similar. Like for you guys, it's homelessness, but there are related causes that make a lot of sense, whether it's mental health or reintroducing people who had been incarcerated or gone through different types of counseling and programs, or substance abuse. Those are the people, that might, foster care is another thing. Those are the people that might end up in a homeless situation. And so people that have supported those causes are very important. So we kind of match it to what we want the outcome to be. We do the research. We use AI really just as a tool to generate a list, but really to generate the links. And then you start reading and you start seeing people quoted, and you can use that then to reach out to the right people. And then I kind of pivot to LinkedIn to do more research on, who's who and, what titles do they have and are they still there and all that. And then a combination of, good old fashioned emails, DMs, and phone calls is just you're just trying to get a conversation going. There's no hard sell. You're certainly not doing any kind of an ask there. You're just trying to see if somebody is willing to entertain a conversation about this organization that hits on stuff that they've already shown is very important and that they've already done work to help combat this cause or a cause like it. And, it's funny, Matt, one of the things I struggled with you guys at the beginning is there were so many different angles, and it took me a couple of weeks to get myself organized, because I'm like, well, I can call on like big corporations, right, that have supported homelessness in the past. But then there's a lot of people out there, individuals that have been advocates of finding ways to get the unhoused back into a community type of setting. And then there's nonprofit collaborations, and I've got a ton of nonprofit, contacts. And I was like, kind of the first couple of weeks, I was all over the place because there were so many things. And then I kind of hit my groove and got it organized. But it's, I think it's deep research. Find the information that's out there, read it, understand who is talking about it from these different businesses, and then reach out to those people with very personal and customized messaging, complimenting them on what they've already done in the past, explaining just a little bit about what the nonprofit I'm representing for that particular time, what they're about, and just seeing if there is, a willingness for a quick chat. And that's really the extent of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I like to think about partnerships and collaboration as like the network effect. The more pieces, the more components that you add into a network, the greater that network becomes, and the more it benefits everyone in the network. And so that's why, when you're finding these organizations, helping to provide that alignment and that connectivity. So the goal with, Cherry Willow and the network we're developing is if anyone that comes into contact with any of these different services, if they are not able to facilitate help that individual or that family, they can connect them with someone else in the network that can facilitate that change. And particularly in the homelessness sector, there's a lot of siloed data where based on your geography, you may not be able to get access to services. And there may not be any information about how people have helped you in the past, what type of help would be the most beneficial for you. And so that's something that as we develop and grow, we're trying to make it easier for, again, all of the great nonprofits that are out there that are servicing these individuals to help them if they can't directly get connected with and support that individual, that they can connect them and have a warm handoff so that person doesn't feel like they're having to start from scratch. They're having to go back to whatever unstable environment that they're seeking help from. They actually have someone that is not only going to be an advocate for them, but they're helping them get connected with someone who can facilitate whatever services that might be. Because to your point, Dan, there's so many different facets that could cause someone to become homeless. The number one is just a lack of affordable housing, which, policy change can hopefully, as we build this community of people who are educated, we can advocate and get that policy changed so that we can fund more affordable housing. I know that there's an initiative. Some of the funds that were available in COVID are potentially expiring, and that could cause 60,000 people to go back on the street and now become back. There's no safety net for these individuals, and so like I don't see how any way of having 60,000 additional people on the street who have been receiving this rent assistance, how is that going to benefit anybody? And that's some of the work that I do, is just educating people that not only is it more humane to house people, it's also more economic. When you look at the burden on emergency services, when you look at the increase in crime when people are in more desperate situations, all of these upstream effects from actually just providing housing and support. And so getting more people aware that it's extremely beneficial for people to be housed in their communities. Because we don't talk about, when we talk about mental health and addiction, those issues are prevalent with people that are homeless because they're on the street. They don't have somewhere to work on that. But those issues are prevalent throughout society. There's so many people that battle addiction, so many people that battle mental health. I saw a recent study that said like 25 to 33% of Americans have mental health challenges. So it's a widespread issue. And again, just coming together, building community, collaborating with each other. Together, we can all, go further and lift each other up. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, and just try to encourage people to, again, I saw someone else said the small actions, big impacts. The more people we have taking those daily small actions, believing that those small actions do make a difference, the more difference that we actually will end up making.
Yeah, I think you're so right. You need to just spread the word. It's hard sometimes. If you think about one of the things that the nonprofit sector is up against, I think, is people like to see results. They like to see the impact they're making, right? And it's hard on some of these causes. You're not going to solve homelessness tomorrow, right?
Right.
You're not going to solve, from just something that's near and dear to my heart. You're not going to stop the proliferation of all these, these mass puppy mills and people who just, breed animals and set them out on the street and all that, tomorrow. You're not going to fix all these underfunded neighborhoods tomorrow. So sometimes it's hard to grasp as a donor, why should I give? It's not even said, meanly. It's just, why should I give? It's never going to be a solution in my lifetime. So that's why, again, I think it's important for nonprofits to keep reminding people of the small wins and the impact that they're having every day, and showing examples and telling stories. But also just getting people involved. I think the more people, if you're just making a donation and you want to see an impact, it's difficult, right? And some nonprofits are good at saying, hey, your $20 did this, but everybody kind of recognizes that's a little bit generic, right? But if they're involved, they're really, truly involved in a variety of different ways. Now they're feeling it, and they can see the progress, and they feel good. And that includes, by the way, bringing the communities you're serving into this ecosystem. So I know, I hope I don't offend anybody with saying this, nonprofits, some can have kind of a hero complex and say, we know the solutions and we're going to do that. And I certainly see it globally, the whole global north versus global south thing. But, I think getting the communities involved in part of this, and having the exposure between the community served, the people that are, benefiting the program, but should also have input into the programs, and should be able to be the ones that will tell you what they really need, and have them be able to have conversations and exposure with donors and prospects and the nonprofit staff and the partners that are brought on board. I think that creating that ecosystem, that community. We've talked a few times already about community.
Yeah.
Creating that community is what's going to create a movement. And I think nonprofits and social enterprises that are adept at creating communities where all these people can exist and get involved and be part of something, those are the ones that are going to be successful. The ones that are still kind of siloed and it's just nonprofit and donor community, I think they're going to struggle going forward, because I think the need is to have a movement, not just, a fundraising appeal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think something else that you said really resonated with me was, storytelling over statistics. It's very difficult to look at a number and feel any type of emotion, towards that. And so I think when you focus more on the stories, the impact that you have, and you have an ability, because a lot of the times that's a challenge too in the nonprofit space. These people are very vulnerable, so you're not able to necessarily want to proliferate, this really emotional story. And so we're working on some ways to allow people to anonymously share their stories, but they can still connect, with the impact that it had. And I think that's some of the stuff that we're building into the technology. It's just to give donors more of an impact and be able to see and feel the change that their support is having. Feel the more emotional the support is, the more likely they're going to share that story with other people. They're going to feel inspired to get more people involved because they've seen firsthand the impact that they've had. And whether that's by volunteering, whether that's by donating, wearing merchandise, just sharing advocacy statements, advocating for policy change on social media, there's so many actions that we can take. And so the more we are able to actually tell those stories and feel the impact on the people, because at the end of the day, you said, regardless if it's a business, it's still a person on the other end. There's someone making a decision. There's someone that's being impacted by your decision. And so the more people that we can get connecting that, or, whether it's an animal, to your point earlier, charities. And there's a lot of really cool organizations that are supporting, people that are experiencing homelessness that have animals. That's often, a barrier to actually getting shelter. If a person has a pet and that shelter doesn't allow pets, now they're faced with giving up, a potential, like a member of their family, a loved one that they care about, and their pet, or getting shelter. And so that's a really challenging situation that, not a lot of people think about, and just one of the other facets when it comes to particularly homelessness.
Yeah, happens with the elderly too, going into nursing homes and things like that, and suddenly being separated from a pet. And so it's difficult. I want to just touch back on what you said about data and stories. And this is definitely not my phrase. Other people have said it, but the best way to do it is data wrapped in a story, right?
Yeah.
Because data earns trust. It gives you that evidence-based information that people need to believe that the impact is real. But that's it. It doesn't drive emotion. Stories drive emotion, and emotion is what really creates action. People don't act on data; they act on emotion, and that's what the stories really do. And I love what you said about giving people in the communities, the homeless community, chance to share their stories anonymously, because there's a fine line between storytelling and ethical and non-ethical storytelling, right? Exploiting the populations you serve to get more money or get more funding. But to do it anonymously, or if there are people who absolutely want to tell their story and be, not anonymous, that's certainly their call. But I think it's critical to hear from them rather than assuming that we know what their stories are. Because even some things, when you and I have just had a casual conversation on a catch up or something, that stunned me when you talked about who the homeless really are, was an eye opener for me. And it's not what you think. It's not necessarily the people that are recovering from addiction. It could be people with jobs that just, either got a salary cut, rent went up, mortgages went up, whatever it was, a health problem that all of a sudden, their drugs are costing $20,000 a year, their prescriptions, whatever it is, there's a lot of situations, and we don't necessarily think like that. And that's why I think their stories could really lift the narrative on what people think homelessness is all about, at least in this country. And I'm guessing it's similar in a lot of countries around the world. So I just think it's a really good opportunity to get the message out there and get a movement going as people understand, what's going on and what it means. And you're right, there's so many things happening today that, that are going on with regulations and and different mandates that I don't think they're thinking through the unintended consequences. And all of a sudden, like you said, all of a sudden, if there's 60,000 people more out on the streets, how does that help anyone? There's just no bonus. There's no benefit to that whatsoever. So, yeah, it's interesting. And that's why, that's why I said I gravitated towards you guys at the beginning, because I think you're going about it the right way.
Yeah, and I just think just providing awareness. Like 30% of the people impacted by homelessness in this country are families. 1 in every 30 children across the country are experiencing homelessness. And that's almost a child in every classroom. And obviously, it's not distributed that way. There are certain areas where economically there's probably more children impacted by homelessness than others. But even in affluent communities, I'm out here in Chicago in the suburbs. People think of Naperville as one of the wealthiest suburbs. There's over 200 kids in that school district that are experiencing homelessness. There's I think a couple thousand kids that are experiencing food insecurity. So it's not an isolated issue. And I think when it comes to homelessness, people, they separate themselves. And that's why I like my humanize, not otherize phrase. It's like, in order to go about your day, you kind of, well, that's not like, I can't do anything about that. Or, you put it out of your mind. And you don't stop to recognize the humanity of it. And that's, again, if that's all you can do is take a couple of minutes of time to just talk to that person, that makes the big difference. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we can do more, just culturally, to be aware. And if you look at just a lot of other financial issues right now as a country, like credit card debt is at an all-time high. There's a lot of challenges. Wages haven't kept up with the cost of goods and housing. So a lot of this stuff requires policy change. But if we're educated, we can really come together and advocate for the policies that are beneficial for everyone, and not get so divided, which a lot of people are very skilled at doing, creating this division between people that more often than not are able to come together. And then I'm tailwinding it here into like sports. Sports, I think, is something that's really cool, and the way that people come together. You're not asking like, oh, are you X or Y or Z? You're like, oh, you're a sports fan. Oh yeah, we can talk about sports. And so I think we need to focus more on things that bring us together, and just appreciating each other, rather than the things that divide each other. And I think similarly in the nonprofit sector, like not focusing on competing against each other, or my mission is more important than yours, or my way is better than yours, but collaborating on how we can further each other's missions. And so that's, what Cherry Willow is here to help organizations do.
I think that's huge. I think the education component is underrated for nonprofits, for profits, for social enterprises, whatever the mission is. There's a lot of good people that just don't know any better because they haven't been exposed to certain things. I mean, I will tell you, my younger daughter went right out of college and she became a school teacher in Cleveland and joined, Teach for America. And she was placed in a charter school that was catering to underfunded, communities and minorities to get them, and the goal was to get them ready for college. Now, she was teaching first grade, so not quite getting them ready for college, but still. This was in 2019, and March of 2020 hit, and everybody knows what happened then. Suddenly you had the pandemic. So forgetting about the difficulties of trying to teach 6-year-olds remotely, what was an eye-opener for me was she was like, we can't go remote for like a while. Like 75% of our students, or whatever the number was, I don't remember exactly, don't have internet access. Like they don't have internet. It wasn't even a thought to me, in my neighborhood. They went to their 5G internet, and it stinks. It was a pandemic. They were home, but they, by 2 days later, they were online and taking their classes, right? But this was a whole different situation, and it wasn't that I don't care or other people don't care. It's like you just don't even think about things like that. That's why I think that the spreading the word through advocacy, through these conversations becomes so much more important, so that people who don't know, once they find out, would just be way more likely to then dive in and support the cause, because they think, wow, that's really a problem, and that's actually something that could be fixed. There are pieces of homelessness. Yeah, can you solve the whole issue tomorrow? No, but are there pieces of it that could be solved, in fairly short order? Absolutely, and I think that's what you guys are focused on, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's just the challenge is focusing on the next right thing. Like that's always Yeah, I'm very interested in philosophy and kind of that storytelling. And when you can't see the forest through the trees, or you don't know which way to go, but can you see the next right step? Okay, let's take that and let's take that. And then the more we're stepping in the right direction, next thing you know, we're looking up and we've made a really big impact and we've come a long way, by just focusing on the right thing that's right in front of us right now, how we can make an impact today, and how we can encourage others to be involved in that. So I think that's a great sentiment there.
Awesome. So I
Yes.
think we only have a few minutes left, and we're standing at least on the East Coast and Central. We're standing behind, between everybody's between this and
Yeah,
everybody's
the
dinner
dinner.
time.
Yeah. Did you have any closing remarks, Dan? Or it looks like there's a question here. Um, yeah, how can nonprofit better connect with conscious partners through initiatives like this? So I would say that apparel is, if you wanted to leverage apparel, I would love to have a conversation and see if there's a way that we could help you. And then collaborations, with ethical brands, they're going to strengthen the impact in your community. If you're leveraging apparel by, again, being a marketing tool, so people that are already supporting your brand, they're aware of your brand or your organization, your mission, they can then go and wear that out in the community. They can tell that story, and generate that enthusiasm from others to get them involved. And so all of our collaborations, fund the organization that we're working with, so that they can not only generate some funds, but they also have that impact from a marketing perspective and the opportunity to tell those stories in the communities, get connected with potential donors, potential volunteers, sponsors, and any other people that want to support their mission. And so, Dan, do you have any closing remarks? I feel like this has been a great conversation. Hopefully, the people learned a lot. I know I did. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and always great getting to speak with you.
Well, I appreciate it. I will say, yeah, the collaborations are just so huge, and I think, somebody said this to me. I don't remember who. I wish I could give them credit, but they said the best partnerships, collaborations, they don't feel transactional; they feel inevitable, and I think that's really important. There's just natural, gravitating, to certain causes and teaming up. And I think what you guys are doing is really incredible. And I would encourage anybody out there, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a social enterprise, whatever, if you're a corporation, and you think that this might be something interesting, reach out to Matt, reach out to me, reach out to Sean. It doesn't matter. Have that conversation and figure out, is there a way to collaborate? And I will also say, you touched on it once, but Matt is doing a 750-mile bike ride. What is it, Seattle to Sacramento?
Sacramento to San Diego.
Sacramento to San Diego in July. I don't even like to drive 750 miles in my car, let alone ride a bike. So if they're, but it's great. He's not just riding and he's not just raising money. He's going to be stopping at shelters along the way and doing a documentary and probably doing some live streams and just, all that is, again, spreading the word, building the movement. So I would encourage you, if you could visit the Cherry Willow website and check that out. And if you can help out in any way, or if you're on the West Coast and you want to ride a bike, he's happy to have some company along the way. And so I've been really excited to be a partner of Cherry Willow. It's kind of, every time I sit down to reach out to people, I'm kind of all jazzed up because it's just a great story to tell. And it's an easy conversation to have. Obviously, getting people, to actually commit is always just like anything else. When I was in sales and marketing and stuff like that, it's not as easy as those conversations always to move it to the next step. But, people are really excited about what you're building, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And, one thing you said before that I don't want to forget is when you're partnering with, especially with corporations or the bigger brand name nonprofits, one of the benefits you get is the benefit of their PR, their marketing, their advertising engine. And that's gigantic. I mean, nonprofits just don't have that, right? Not that big. And that, if you can forge a really tight partnership with someone, the amount of PR, the amount of getting the word out there about your mission, your cause, is just staggering compared to what you could do for yourself. And that's why I'm a big proponent of these types of partnerships. So Matt, I really appreciate you having me on. I really appreciate the partnership, and it has been a ton of fun.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. This has been great. Really appreciate you coming on. And if you were from my network and you're just learning about Dan and Philanthropy Fuel, reach out to him. He's been a wonderful partner. I'm sure he could provide value and help steer you in the right direction for some of the challenges that you may be facing. So he's certainly been a great partner for us, and really thankful that he was on the show with us today. So appreciate it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next time, and we'll be giving some more updates on the Pedal for Progress ride, scheduled July 12th through the 20th, Sacramento to San Diego, passing through 7 of the 14 cities with the highest number of people experiencing homelessness. So thanks again, everyone.